everyone. I'm Kristen Hawkins. Welcome to this episode of the Explicitly Pro-Life podcast. As you know, we are talking about abortion crimes this season. As we know, every abortion is a crime, but we need to talk about what happens within the abortion industry because it's really, as we've discovered this season, isn't really being talked about. So joining me today is a very special friend. I've known her for a number of years, Carol Novelli. Carol is the research fellow at Live Action. You've probably read, if you've been in the pro-life movement at all, you've probably read something that Carol has researched or written in the past few years. She's been in the movement for a while. She first got involved as a teenager, ministering to women outside of abortion facilities. She worked with Mark Crutcher over at Life Dynamics, investigating how the Planned Parenthood and the rest of the abortion industry covers up child sex abuse. She was instrumental in the research for the documentary Ma'afa 21, which showed the racist roots of the abortion industry. And currently, she has been working with Live Action and researching the foundations, the very beginnings of the chemical abortion pill. And that is what I've asked you on to talk about today, Carol. Thanks for joining me.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, you are, I would say, when we talk about, uncovering what happens and how we've gotten to this point with chemical abortion, your name comes up a lot in discussion because everyone just goes, yep, Carol's the expert. You have to talk to Carol. So how did you, before we get into some of what's going on, how did you first get turned on to, we have a problem and it's chemical abortion and we need to start looking into this?
Well, it was actually one of the first projects I was assigned when I came on board Live Action. They were like, dig into it, see where it goes. And with having had a lot of background in the eugenics movement, I kind of take different twists and turns in my research and looking at things a little bit differently than some of the ones that have researched it in the past. There are some fabulous historical researchers like Family Research Council and Chris Gasick, and even your own staff has done an amazing job looking at the abortion pill. Yeah. So, that's what I did. I just did all things abortion pill for several years, and it's still ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be ongoing. And we've talked a little bit about it on this podcast, especially when we're thinking about the decision to come down with the Supreme Court this summer on the Dobbs case about the 15-week abortion ban in Mississippi, whether they ruled to uphold it and whether they use it to strike down Roe. Regardless of what the Supreme Court's decision is, we know the abortion industry is moving very fast, and they've used COVID. They've really taken on the never let a good tragedy go to waste mantra that the left is so famous for using, to use COVID to push for the expansion of these pills. And it helps them because they don't have to convince abortionists to commit second or third trimester abortions, which are gruesome. No one wants to do. They don't have to dispose of the child. They can tell her to sit at her own toilet and flush and do not look. It's a win-win for the abortion industry. Really, it is, because they can have abortionists and high-rise buildings, and you're not an abortionist. You're just prescribing a pill, and then you're not having to worry about the disposal fees or being picketed and protested. So I guess start from the beginning for chemical abortion. I've been talking a lot about like the dangers, things that they're not telling women, but where did it come from?
Well, it was actually developed by a French endocrinologist, and I'm going to kill his name since I don't speak French.
I messed up your last name. So
okay, if you can mess up Italian, I can mess up French. So Étienne Émile Ballou. He was a consultant for a pharmaceutical company called Roussel-Uclaf. Okay. So in 1988, France, through a series of events, they did push forward and approve the pill. But what's interesting is it came in under the name of RU486. RU stands for Roussel-Uclaf, and 486 are the last three digits of the pill's serial number. So it was actually banned in the United States for quite a number of years. They would not let it come into the country for many reasons. There was a lot of controversy, obviously, because it was a pill chemical that would, poison and kill children in the womb. But also, Roussel-Uclef had another history that a lot of people were very much aware of, and that is one of their subsidiaries, Hooks AG, was made up kind of under the breakup of a company called IG Farben. And IG Farben is a chemical company that developed the cyanide gas that exterminated Jews in the Nazi prison camps, called Zyklon B. And so you had a lot of people coming up and kind of bringing these two sort of killing drugs together, giving a lot of bad publicity to Roussel, who had investors within the United States. And I personally went to the U.S. French consulate and picketed there that we were against RU-486 here in the United States. So there's all this controversy going on. It's being kept out of the country. And so I just, within the last couple of years, came across an old C-SPAN press conference, kind of showing you all the players that were pushing for this drug to come in. And I think you've probably heard the name Larry Lader, or Lawrence Lader as he's known. He was called the father of the abortion movement, and he was a biographer of Margaret Sanger. He called himself a disciple of the white supremacist, racist founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger. So he's on this conference with all the old guard. You had like Molly Yard of the Feminist Majority, and what was her name from NOW now? It just slipped my mind. But anyway, they're all on there, and he was even working to bring this pill in illegally. He says, we have all kinds of little trickeries that we can use to bring this pill into the United States. But the abortion industry kind of landed on kind of a hero for bringing this drug in, and his name was President Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. And even though it had been banned for all of these years from coming into the United States, it was under the administration of President Bill Clinton in 1993 who he basically told the FDA to work to bring this pill into the country. But what's interesting, even with regard to that, is that prior, in 1992, he receives this letter. And the letter came from a man by the name of Ron Weddington. And if your viewers think the name Weddington is familiar, they should, because he was the husband of Sarah Weddington, who argued for the abortion side in the Roe versus Wade case. And he was also co-counsel on that case. So Ron Weddington sends this letter, and it was uncovered by Judicial Watch in a FOIA request, which you can go to their website and read a lot of history on the abortion pill from there. Ron Weddington is basically kind of bemoaning all of these different groups of people that we need to, population control. We need to eliminate certain segments of society. And he mentions RU-486 as one solution. So I'll just give you a couple of his little statements. He says you can start immediately to eliminate the barely educated, unhealthy, and poor segment of our country. And he says, no, I'm not advocating like a wholesale genocide. Of course, they never are, right? Eugenicists never want to come right out and say what they're up to. He also says, Sarah and I have been discussing the notion of setting up a nonprofit corporation to license and distribute RU-46. And he bemoans the fact that 26 food stamp recipients is more than the economy can stand. And then he says government should be used to provide abortions, and he talks about tubal ligations and vasectomies, basically any form of sterilization, which is kind of the population control. The letter is dated 1992, sent to the soon-to-be President Bill Clinton, and you can read the letter. We've written about it at Live Action News. I know it's mentioned in the documentary Malfa 21 that you mentioned earlier, and it's also in the Judicial Watch, FOIA, what they compiled from FOIA requests on the abortion pill. So there's this letter going around, and so the next year, 1993, President Clinton signs an executive order directing the FDA to expedite the RU-486, as it was called. And then the following year, they put pressure on Roussel-Uclef to turn over their patent rights, their U.S. patent rights of the drug, to another very eugenicist-founded group called the Population Council. And they were very, very involved in the 90s and prior to that with abortion, family planning, population control. They were actually founded in 1952 by one of the fathers of the eugenics movement, John D. Rockefeller III. And their all of their presidents, the next few presidents anyway, were heavily tied to the American eugenics movement. In fact, their second president, Frederick Osborne, he was actually a founding member of the American eugenics movement, and he signed Margaret Sanger's Citizen Committee for Planned Parenthood. And he once wrote, "Eugenic goals are most likely attained under a name other than eugenics." Kind of like, maybe abortion.
The Eugenics Society became the American Genetic Society. And the first president of the American Eugenics Society was also, I think, was Alan Guttmacher, correct?
No, he wasn't he was a vice president of the American Eugenics Society. And they were founded.
Told you she knows her stuff.
Yeah. But he actually was involved in the first medical advisory committee of the Population Council. So here you have Alan Guttmacher, whose namesake, the Guttmacher Institute, the Guttmacher Institute, which is a former special affiliate of Planned Parenthood, and Guttmacher being a longtime president of Planned Parenthood. He's actually, and this is another history that your viewers might be interested in, he actually was the man behind pushing Planned Parenthood to commit abortions. And there's a fascinating history that goes on there. But he was on the first medical advisory board. And one of their other presidents, Bernard Burleson, you may not know the name, but you probably remember the study in Studies in Family Planning that was published, where they basically said, if voluntary methods of birth control fail, then we should put sterility agents in the waters of urban neighborhoods. See, Guttmacher, Burleson, a lot of these eugenicists at the time were talking about volunteerism, but only not straight up volunteerism or choice. They were doing kind of the Margaret Sanger philosophy, which is if it doesn't work, then we're going to have to use force or coercion.
All right, we got to back up. I needed a whiteboard to be writing all of these connections and this like spider web of evil essentially that's happened. So just for everyone listening, so RU486 was created by a company whose one of its subsidiaries created the gas Zyklon B, which was used in the Nazi concentration extermination gas chambers to kill Jewish people.
Yes. It was developed.
My first question is, why the hell is that company, Roussel, still in business? Like, I don't know, you commit mass Holocaust. How is this company still in business?
Well, it was a breakup of IG Farben that they broke up the company. The whole history of the Nazi regime, that's a whole long history, but the company was broken up, and it was one of the Hooks AG that Roussel Uclef had as a subsidiary. So there basically is this connection, maybe not directly that it was Roussel that developed it, but there is this connection within the organization. And this is one of the things that was being brought up and being protested about. They were getting a lot of bad publicity, but President Clinton was able to twist their arms. And so the Roussel turned over their patent rights to the Population Council. And then the Population Council, they could not find what pharmaceutical company wants to step up and be in this whole mess, right?
Sure.
So they decided that they would develop their own single entity company, or called it Danco Laboratories. There's also some messy stuff that happened before that.
So this Population Council, which was founded by eugenicists with the goal of limiting undesirable people's birth, they decided they couldn't find a pharmaceutical manufacturer to make this pill that was being made in France, here in America. So they set up their own corporation.
Yeah, they set up Danco Laboratories, which was a very secretive and still remains to be very secretive, partly because the FDA has continued to allow it to be secretive. What's interesting is that
do they make anything else besides the abortion bill?
Nope. Not that we're aware of. I mean, at the time that it was created, it was only created to be in charge of the manufacturing of the abortion pill RU486. And so they also had to get these investors, and they had to get this company going. And again, who's going to step forward and invest in a sole entity company that's just producing an abortion pill? And so coming to the rescue, we have the very well-known abortion philanthropists that many of your viewers may be familiar with. One was the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, which stepped up with a $14.2 million investment and seeded Danco in its early days. It's interesting because very few investors have been really made public, but of the ones that were, typically you have the Buffett Foundation, the Warren Buffett owned Buffett Foundation. We had reports of George Soros's Open Society Foundation and a handful of others that actually became public, but there's no way to really find out, who else was investing. So these same investors that were investing in Danco today are investing in Genuity Health Projects, which is conducting clinical trials on the drug. They are investing in some of the publications that are publishing studies that say the drug is safe. It's very, very incestuous. There was even a case where we challenged one, I think it was the ACOG's publication. We challenged them on one. They actually allowed one of the authors say that they had an anonymous funder. And when we challenged it and they went back to the authors, it turned out to be the Buffett Foundation, which is, again, who seeded Danco. So there's this incestuous financial conflict of interest thing going on behind the scenes. And that's just in the early days. And then, so the media, they were, and just one other point you might be interested in, Packard is also a heavy funder of the generic abortion pill manufacturer called GenBioPro, which was in 2019, FDA allowed the generic version to go forward. And here comes Packard again to fund that organization. But behind the scenes in the early days in the 1990s, even the media was like, this is so secretive. What is going on? The principals, the investors, the location sites of the drug, all of it, hush, hush. Nobody knew what was going on. And the FDA even allowed so much of this secrecy, even to the point that the FDA shielded the experts who reviewed the drug for the approval. And to this day, their names are still kept under lock and key. You had even the Washington Post, who said in 2000 that the FDA took the unprecedented step of refusing to disclose the name or location of the manufacturer. They also said the agency broke with precedent by not publishing the names and experts who reviewed RU486. LA Times, Wall Street Journal, they were all calling this out and saying, this is very unprecedented. And if you want to kind of hear kind of some history from the people that were involved at the time, I will send you an archived version of an interview that was done by some journalists at Columbia University. And after we highlighted some of the statements there, they have pulled that. In fact, they've pulled a lot of things that we have.
Yeah, just like how the NYU used to have the whole Margaret Sanger. I was looking for some of Margaret Sanger's writings the other day. NYU used to have the Sanger Center, and they had all of her writings. And since it came out last year, the mainstream media finally accepted the fact of what we've been saying all along is true, that she was a racist. Now you can't find anything on Margaret Sanger. I'm like, why?
Yeah, they've moved. They're in they're in the process of moving it so that all of the. It's interesting, so the links just go dead, but they're in the process of moving, and who knows what they're censoring. But I noticed that same thing too. Yeah, they keep pulling things, and every time we uncover all of these financial connections, voila, you go back and the website is gone. So we've spent a lot of time.
That's unbelievable. So it started in the 90s, this Population Council, a group of eugenicists funded by the big time, George Soros, Buffett, and Rockefellers. Not surprising, they've been worried about world overpopulation, even though it's been disproven for decades. So they pushed Clinton into pushing the FDA, his FDA, to move forward with this drug. When did the drug, I remember this, but I'm asking you for the viewers, when did the FDA finally give full approval for RU486?
So it was finally approved in September 28th, 2000. So we just passed the 21st anniversary of the drug's approval. Interestingly enough, I always like to find these little tidbits of information that maybe people don't know about. One of the clinical sites that actually tested the drug, a lot of people may not know, was overseen by a doctor by the name of Tyrone Malloy. Does that name ring a bell? I'm sure it will when I tell you. He was doing clinical trials of RU486 at the Feminist Women's Health Center in Atlanta. And in 2011, he was actually indicted and then later sentenced for 2 counts of Medicaid fraud. So it's quite interesting to kind of delve in. But Planned Parenthood, a lot of the same players that are doing the trials now, University of California, heavily funded by the Buffett Foundation, which trains abortionists through their Ryan residency and Bixby. They were all players in the clinical trials. What's interesting is Beverly Winnicott, in that previous Columbia University interview, Beverly Winnicott was originally involved in the Population Council's trials, and then she went on. I'm sorry, she went on to found Genuity Health Projects, and in that interview, she makes a really amazing statement where she says that it was September 11th, the 9/11 terrorist attack, that saved mifepristone, or saved the abortion pill. What she meant by that was shortly after the approval in 2000, you started to see women dying. The reports of deaths of women started to come on the horizon. And this one was from Canada. And it made the papers on September 10th. And she was very nervous about it making the papers. And then obviously when 9/11 happened, it got relegated. It got relegated to the back pages. And so she said, yeah, it was sent to the back page as well. It was 1 death versus 3,000. This is a woman who's literally doing clinical trials today through Genuity. And these people who say that they care for women, this was their attitude. They were more concerned that the abortion pill would be able to keep going than whether or not a woman died. And so over the course of the next few years, Danco is literally forced to send out these warning letters to healthcare providers. So over the next few years, Danco was sending out these, what they call warning letters to healthcare professionals. They were warning of adverse events, which included ruptured ectopic pregnancies, which we still see is a problem today if you read the label, risk of sepsis and blood infections. And they noted that several deaths that involved the off-label dosing of the drug. They added that warnings involving risk of serious bacterial infection, sepsis, and bleeding and death. So, when they attack things like the abortion pill reversal and they say, oh, it's an off-label use of a drug, what most people in the media fail to say is that the abortion industry itself, even after the FDA, got to remember, the FDA had already approved it. There was already a regimen. There was already the amount of dosage and the way to implement the dosage. And yet the abortion industry is already, within a few years, going off-label. And so it was this off-label use of the drug that is linked to several deaths. In fact, in 2003, Planned Parenthood's implementation of this off-label unapproved regimen led to the death of 18-year-old Holly Patterson. She was a young girl in California, and her father, Monty Patterson, bless his heart, I spoke to him not too long ago. He went to the mat to try to call out the FDA and call out the dangers of this drug. But even abortionist Philip Darney, and Darney was involved with the UC system, University of California, longtime abortionist, and he wrote a letter to the editor in Journal Contraception, where he basically said the U.S. death rate was higher than Europe, and this is what his said. His reason was, he says, quote, U.S. physicians do not follow the FDA-approved instructions for using both drugs. That was his quote, an abortionist who was involved in the clinical trials. And he actually cites Planned Parenthood and says that their abortion death rate was higher than many others. So it was all of these deaths linked to this rare infection that led to the FDA putting the abortion pill under this safety system called REMS, which stands for Risk Evaluation Mitigation Strategy, which is what they're trying to get it lifted off of. Yep. And so the FDA put that under that restriction in 2011. And it was even Obama, his FDA in 2016 still wanted it to remain under the REMS. Mm-hmm. So what we're hearing today is, as we're seeing them, screaming to have the REMS lifted, this is why these dangerous outcomes are why, but now they can sort of, hide it, because in 2016, Obama's FDA gave them a really good way of hiding things, because they removed the requirement that Danco report any adverse events. The only reports that they had to do were reports of death. Mm-hmm. So we don't even know how many adverse events, if there are any in the FAERS system. We find that those are just voluntary ones that were reported by random physicians, or maybe even the woman themselves, since 2016. So yeah, it's quite,
yeah. That we've seen this on campuses, even girls who will come up screaming at our Students for Life team members or student leaders, and when we get them to calm down and start having a conversation with us, they'll pull up their cell phone and they'll show pictures of these children that they've aborted in their toilets. And these are not 5-week-old children. These are 12, 14, 15-week-old children that they could clearly see, and that they then took pictures of their baby. And so we know that they're using this drug off-label. What's so fascinating right now is, so you have the Biden administration's rushing to get rid of all the REMS at the urging of the abortion industry, which is like, the tobacco industry saying, we don't need any inspections here, no government interference, like we know what we're doing, we can give as much nicotine to people as possible, it's all good. Crazy. But we do it all the time with abortion facilities. We've seen already this season where these abortion facilities, Kermit Gosnell's clinic, hadn't been inspected for 17 years because Planned Parenthood, moderate Republicans, pro-choice Democrats got together in Harrisburg and passed a law saying, the abortion industry can regulate itself. We might regulate women's hair care salons and veterinary clinics, but we trust them. We don't want to interfere because access trumps safety. So, why? I shouldn't be surprised by anything that you're saying, but I am. But what was interesting to me was and I'm sure you probably wrote about this, Carol, during COVID, when everyone was trying to figure out what was going on, how dangerous was COVID, everything was shut down. Planned Parenthood was fighting tooth and nail to get their hands on PPE, personal protective equipment. I remember in Pennsylvania, I got fundraising solicitations from Planned Parenthood Keystone for money so they can buy the limited PPE so they could continue to commit abortions. But what we saw in Montana and other remote locations, this Genuity Health study that you're mentioning, it's like this study that these rich elitist eugenic corporations are funding, that the FDA is allowing to basically give out these drugs without a woman ever even seeing her doctor or getting a blood test to confirm that she's pregnant. And they're saying, well, we're doing this in rural areas with COVID to make sure women still have access to abortion. And it's like this big test for the REMS. How is that legal? Because they're clearly violating the own regulations that they've the laws that they put in place to make sure that women don't die from these abortions and just babies die.
Well, they're doing it under the guise of a clinical trial. What you see if you look at the history of that trial, it's called the teleabortion study. What you see is that the trial has grown exponentially. They've added more participants, which, by the way, I think that trial is like recruiting 10-year-olds up to like 50-year-olds.
10-year-olds?
Yeah, I believe it's that study that if you go and look, and I think it's in certain places, that will allow each one of the study sites will allow different ages. Carafem, by the way, is part of that study. They're an abortion pill. It's basically all they do. And they are tied to a company called DKT International, which ships abortion drugs all over the world. And it's heavily funded by the Gates Foundation. So, this clinical trial that started, I think, in like 2015, it kept going through changes, kept adding locations. And the longer it went on, I think it was, they were going to continue on until they could really blow up the REMS. You even had people, making comments about how women could just go to a state, like cross state lines in the middle of COVID, and all you have to do is like do this teleabortion. As long as you give us an address in a state that the trial is going on, we can ship the drug to you. And so this is kind of their workaround, and it was even called that in one of the articles by one of the spokespersons, I believe, for Genuity, I believe. I mentioned it in one of the articles. I can dig that out, but it was called a workaround, the REMS. But even like worse than that, the no test protocol. At least in some ways the trial is kind of like dotting I's and crossing T's, so to speak. But the no test protocol that they rolled out, which they claim was because of COVID again, which is it was called a no test protocol, and that was already in the works prior to COVID. But they're using COVID as an excuse, and so basically believe the woman. That's their thing. Believe the woman on what she says is the gestational age or when her last menstrual period is. And you have groups like ACOG, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, also founded their abortion. Their move towards abortion came from population control and eugenicists that were within their organization. But ACOG actually admits that most women do not properly date their pregnancies. And so you have this idea.
I'm one of those women. Never got right.
But yeah, believe the woman. And so when you talk about the girls that are showing these pictures of their children, they knew that this was going to happen. In fact, they're already starting to prep women of what they're going to see. And so they're already starting to say you might see identifiable fetal tissue. But in one of the webinars that I listened to during the COVID pandemic, they literally said, well, as long as it'll flush, we don't care about the gestational age. And I'm obviously paraphrasing, but as long as the baby will flush. So that's why you're seeing women at 14, 15 weeks, because they don't care if the woman has her dating off. They even talked about ectopic pregnancies and said, well, we'll fix that, after she takes the pill and we discover that she's still pregnant. How are they going to discover this when the woman is taking it at home and may or may not do a follow-up call? I don't know. And if she doesn't take an additional pregnancy test to discover that she's still pregnant, she could end up in a very almost deadly, probably deadly situation if she has an ectopic pregnancy. So the safety of women has not been on the forefront of this industry all along. And now you have Dr. Daniel Grossman, who's been at the, kind of the lead spokesperson in the media. He's a former NARAL board member. He's associated with the National Abortion Federation. He's also a senior advisor at IVIS Reproductive Health. Why is that important? Because for years, IVIS Reproductive Health was getting direct funding from Danco, which is the manufacturer of the abortion pill. So you talk about conflicts of interest all over the board. So he's now rolling out.
He goes into, he testifies for everything. He's like the Mr.
He's the go-to. Expert. It's always a man. I mean, it was, Alan Guttmacher, Larry Lader. It's always these, men coming to the rescue of women and making us take all of these drugs like hormonal birth control and abortion pills that end up being harmful. But yeah, he's out there pushing for this self-managed DIY abortion through pharmacy, over the counter. They're basically like checking off every list. They're moving in every direction. And he's come up with this new announcement that he's working on what they call advanced provision of the abortion pill, which means handfuls of pills before you're even pregnant. Now, that can't go wrong in any way, shape, or form, especially with teenagers. But yeah, that's what he's working on now. And again, they'll say it's under the guise of COVID. But if you look at his study, he started a study prior to COVID. He put it on hold, and now he's kind of trotting it out again and making all of these. He's been recently writing op-eds. But the media will not look at these conflicts of interest. I recently did an article on multiple media experts, multiple study authors and commentators on saying that the abortion pill is safe, that have all disclosed that they have direct financial ties to GenBioPro and Danco, and many of them are consultants for the manufacturer. So in any other instance, the media would be appalled. I mean, when the opioid thing broke, or tobacco, and we saw that the interest was the organization, it was the corporate interest and not the interest of the public with whom they were dispensing these dangerous, drugs and tobacco. The media stepped up, but with abortion, they remained silent.
And I think that's a common theme that we've heard throughout this season, is that no one's talking about these crimes. No one's talking about the dangerous reality of the abortion industry, how we're jeopardizing women's lives, not only killing children, but we're jeopardizing women. Carol, I want to thank you for coming on. You've given us, I was trying to take notes. I stopped taking notes halfway through because I'm just going to have to listen to my own podcast and retake notes. But you've given us a lot of information. Where do folks who've heard this, who are like, this sounds crazy, this sounds too much like a conspiracy theory, where do they go to kind of get the facts, and so they can print it out for themselves, show it to their friends when they're having discussions?
We've been covering a lot of this at Live Action News. So you can go to liveaction.org/news. We also have an Abortion Pill Kills website where we wrote a very lengthy report that goes into a lot of this history. And there, like I said, there's other organizations like your own, APLOG, Family Research Council, and others that have some really good historical information on this topic. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, make sure you follow Carol and her writings and her amazing undercover and investigative work that she's doing. She's sitting at a computer. I always just imagine you like
swarmed with like books and public records and with 3 computer monitors trying to find information covering it. But that is what Carol, you have this amazing gift to do it. And follow her at Live Action News. If you go to thisischemicalabortion.org, I'm saying I think it's .org. We have a 5-part docuseries we produced with our good friend Charlotte Pence and Heartbeat International on how chemical abortion pills work and how they harm women. And we talk about the abortion pill reversal, the success rate, how it works. So it gives you more of like how chemical abortion works. So make sure you tune into that. You can spread that around as well. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to be talking a lot about chemical abortion in the coming months because this is the next wave of the abortion industry. And as Carol, you've said, Dr. Grossman, he is already on to let's start just giving out pills before a pregnancy even occurs. Who cares about women's health? But we all know, and Carol, you've just brilliantly demonstrated where all comes, where motivation for the chemical abortion pill, where the motivation from the abortion industry comes from, and it's eugenics, friends. That is what this movement is rooted in. It's the belief that certain people should be here on this earth and others should not be, and some people should have the ability to reproduce, others shouldn't. And these world elite, these billionaires, they feel like they can make that world a possibility with their giving through funding these shady corporations, shell corporations like Danco, and bringing drugs like the chemical abortion pill to market. So make sure you do your research and you follow Carol and what she's doing on Live Action News. Check out thisischemicalabortion.com. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe and share this episode with every person you know. Bye-bye.